welcome to Culture on I-24 News. I'm Oded Grober. Thank you for joining me. Today on our show, we'll talk to conductor Michael Hurshell, who is bringing back forgotten pieces from Nazi-era Germany. The Rodin Museum in Paris has reopened after 3 years. And we'll take a look at some exciting new trailers for upcoming animated films. Dresden's New Jewish Chamber Philharmonic is an orchestra dedicated to the band works of Jewish composers who were driven out or murdered during the Nazi era. This week, they are performing for the first time a concert in Tel Aviv at the Israel Conservatory, and the conductor Michael Hurshell is with me in the studio. Thank you for coming in, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
So, what will you be playing?
The names of the composers that you may not have heard of before are Alexander Zemlinsky, Miklos Rozsa, and Erich Wolfgang Korngold, with a little Mendelssohn thrown in, just to make it a little friendlier.
Naturally. But there's a good reason to me not hearing their names before.
They were forgotten. It was the Nazis' intention not only to kill them, but to eradicate their music, really, from the consciousness of the public, and they have almost succeeded. Yeah,
to a large degree, they did succeed, and now, several years later, you're fighting that and trying to bring them back into the public consciousness.
Exactly.
How did it all start?
It started when I was guest conducting at a festival in Germany, and we were doing something unusual. We were doing concert suites from great Hollywood classics of the 30s and 40s, which included many of these composers.
Because some of them later on moved to
fled
Hollywood
to America, like Korngold and like Rozsa, and they wrote splendid film music, of course. And I noticed that the audience knew the film titles, the German audience, but they didn't know who these composers were, and I didn't realize before that how completely forgotten these musicians were. So I said, well, I think I have to do something about that. So it took a few years, but some friends of mine and I in Dresden started to work on that project, and then we started playing in 2007.
Now, musically speaking, is there a musical line throughout their works? Is there something that brings them together?
They were written mostly by a generation of composers who were trained in the late Romantic period of music. So it's not 20th century modern avant-garde music. It's in the tradition of Mahler, let's say.
Okay.
And it's very emotional music. It communicates with the audience immediately, which is why audiences that hear it for the first time usually ask us the question, why haven't we heard this before, and why isn't everybody playing it?
Yeah. Now, as we said, you're located in Dresden. Your venue there also is quite special.
The new synagogue, which was only opened in 2001, and which is actually quite modern on the outside, but inside there's lots of wood, which means it's acoustically good. And that is where we play a large number of the concerts that we do in Dresden, although we've also performed at the Opera House there and at a number of other venues. But that is basically our...
That's it right there. And as we said, first time playing in Israel. Is there a sort of a special feeling playing this in Israel?
We have always wanted to bring this music here, where these composers also are forgotten. It's been 3 generations of musicians and people who are familiar with them. And it's always our feeling when we play, wherever we play, we are bringing music back to audiences that have been denied this music because of what the Nazis did. So it is especially moving to us and exciting for us all to be bringing it here, in a way to be bringing it home to the audience that also hasn't been able to hear it and that really should be able to hear this music.
Yeah. When you talk about audience, you played in the past to Holocaust survivors as well. I'm curious, what sort of reactions are you getting there?
Well, that is probably the most emotional, those are the most emotional moments that I've experienced with the whole project over these 8 years. If you have audience members who are old enough to have remembered going to concerts, maybe as children or as young, very young audience members, they remember these names and they remember the music and are always tremendously moved. So I'm looking forward. We have already met a couple of audience members like that when we performed in Jerusalem yesterday.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to different works by different artists, some were killed, some were murdered during the Holocaust. Some moved on, were able to survive it and build a career for themselves. Do you feel that it's especially important to preserve the works by the artists who were murdered?
It is, of course, a lost piece of the culture of German-speaking Europe, mostly. Like many other Jewish facets of art. I mean, we know what happened to the painters, and we know about literature and many of the other things. Most of that has been sort of been reconstructed. Music is always last when it comes to these things, apparently. And I mean, the composers who survived, even the composers who survived, their careers were destroyed. Making a living in Hollywood writing for the movies is not what they were trained for. They were trained to write for the opera houses and the concert halls, and they really wished that they could go on doing that. But they had to feed their families. And of course, they elevated Hollywood's music. They invented the golden era soundtrack. And of course, the murdered composers, many of them tragically young, that's a loss that can never be repaired. But at least we can try and perform what they did compose.
Yeah. By the way, are the pieces being recorded for future generations?
Well, we are working on that. Some of the pieces that we perform are still just copyrighted, and the licensing fees are quite high, and you have to find a producer who's willing to take that over. But yes, we would very much, we want to wait for the right moment where we can do it on a scale that will be appropriate in terms of the technology it's recorded with, but for sure, absolutely.
Last question, because it is, at the end of the day, a finite repertoire that you're working with. Do you ever get bored?
Never, ever. And in fact, when you say it's finite, I could perform different works, every 2 weeks, probably for the next, I don't know, so and so many years. There's an immense amount of it. Probably also depending on the kind of ensemble you put together. At the moment, we're performing in a pure formation of strings, 23 string players. And even then, we've still got lots of unplayed repertoire. And the minute you add a couple of wind players and percussion, it's 5 or 10 times that. So there's plenty of unplayed repertoire left.
All right. So, Michael, thanks so much for coming in. And tomorrow at the Israel Conservatory, well worth, I think, a listen. Thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Now, the famous Rodin Museum in Paris, dedicated to the French sculptor, is reopening to the public after 3 years of meticulous renovations costing 60 million euros. The renovation will allow museum goers to fully experience the mansion's former glory. More in this report.
Hôtel Biron and its garden, a pastoral mansion in the center of the capital, which was home to the artist Auguste Rodin, and was used as his studio space in the years leading up to his death in 1917. Now, once again, the house is back in the spotlight through a renovation project which has brought it back to its former glory. With an entirely new layout to the room, both chronological and thematic, as well as the unveiling of previous unseen works, which will bring the creative process of the artist to the heart of the exhibition space. Visitors are now able to explore over 50 paintings from Rodin's own personal collection, amongst them works by Vincent van Gogh and Edvard Munch. The mastermind behind the project is museum director Catherine Chevilot. She believes that many of the improvements made will not be obvious to the visitors.
Donc tout ça, le visiteur ne le verra à peu près pas.
Visitors will not really see all the changes, but thanks to the furniture, visitors will see the greatly improved visibility of the works, offering a layout in the museum which permits us to really enter into the sculpture, to dive into the heart of this universe.
Ça permet vraiment d'entrer dans la sculpture, d'être plongé au milieu de cet univers.
Other changes referred to by Chevilot include extensive work on the floors, which were in the urgent need of repair, after suffering the effects of the 700,000 annual visitors to the museum. The 3-year restoration project was partly funded by the sale of bronzes newly cast from original molds.
Le chantier a effectivement coûté 16 millions.
The renovation works cost about 16 million euros, with the French state making a decisive contribution, nearly half of the budget. The rest came from our own private means. The sales of bronzes by Rodin helped in the financing.
Ces fameuses ressources qui sont alimentées par la vente des bronzes de Rodin.
The museum will reopen to the public on November the 12th, the day of Rodin's 175th birthday.
In a moment, we'll check out some new trailers, but first, here's our cultural recommendation for today.
Lorca, Madly in Love is the story of Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca and the forbidden love that cost him his life. David Morales and his flamenco company showcase a fusion of pure flamenco and contemporary dance in a musical celebration of Spanish poet, playwright, and theater director Federico Garcia Lorca, who was executed by nationalist forces at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War in 1936. Many wondered why the artists hadn't fled this premeditated death. The question would later be answered when journalist and art critic Juan Ramirez de Lucas would give a wooden box to his sister right before his death in 2010. Inside the case were drawings, letters, and poems regarding his romance with Garcia Lorca. Ramirez de Lucas had remained silent about his romance with Lorca for more than 70 years due to fears of persecution during the Franco regime, and also because of fear of rejection from his conservative family. Ramirez de Lucas' conservative family had been appalled by his request to go to Mexico with Garcia Lorca and refused him permission to travel, threatening to send the civil guard after him if he tried to leave. Garcia Lorca did not flee Spain as he awaited for his lover to get permission.
Lauren Izo is here in the studio already to talk to us about some trailers for upcoming animated films. Unfortunately, I have a feeling it's not Inside Out. It's not a sequel to Inside Out that we're going to talk about. Not quite yet.
I think they might need a little bit more time to get that one out. But just as exciting, one of my favorite animated films, Finding Nemo, which came out in 2003.
When you were still a child, makes sense.
Kind of, sort of, yes. Yeah. So finally, after much anticipation, Finding Dory is going to be released next year.
They announced it, I think, a year ago.
They announced it a while ago, and they released a poster, but everybody was waiting and waiting and waiting for something to come out from the movie, and finally, there is something.
Let's take a look.
Dory?
Dory!
Dory!
I remembered something. That's not possible. Is it? Okay, is it like a picture in your head, and then you think I've seen this before? I just used the word before, which means I'm remembering something. What was I talking about?
Somewhere.
My family! They're out there somewhere. I have to find them.
Not very different from Finding Nemo, it seems.
I mean, if it was very different, then we wouldn't love it as much as we loved Finding Nemo. We can only hope that this is just as successful as Finding Nemo was. It made almost $100 million in theaters, which is it's so successful.
Yeah. And it was a really fun, cute, sweet film.
It was great. And Ellen DeGeneres is in it. I mean, how can it not be amazing?
That's right. That's why it was, I think it was announced on Ellen's show.
Yeah, she announced it on her YouTube
But we also
page.
have a very different film.
Yes, quite different.
One
also,
that I'm more excited about, I think. Okay.
Also under the animation umbrella, Charlie Kaufman, who is best known for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and being John Malkovich. He's coming out with
writing those scripts.
Exactly. So he's coming out with his very first animated film, which is very exciting. It's called Anomalisa. Now it has a very interesting background because it originally started out as a radio play that's meant to be performed on a stage. Meaning you have the actors on the stage who are reading the scripts, acting them out, as well as people making the sounds, as if it's just a sound experience, but you're watching it happen on stage.
As if it's a radio skit. Right.
So they decided that they wanted to turn it into a film. So they started it with a Kickstarter campaign, and then it was accepted to the Venice Film Festival, where it won an award, and then the Toronto International Film Festival, and it actually is now being funded by Paramount Pictures, which picked it up, and they just released a trailer for it last week, which is let's see it.
Each person you speak to has had a childhood. Each has a body. Each body has aches. Look for what is special about each individual. Focus on that. Remember, there is someone out there for everyone. I think you're extraordinary.
Why?
I don't know yet. It's just obvious to me that you are. Each person you speak to...
That's gorgeous.
I have goosebumps already.
That's gorgeous.
So the really cool thing about this is that they actually printed the facial expressions of the characters on color 3D printers.
Cool.
Which is really different and cool, and I'm excited about it.
And it's definitely going to be, you know, not the material that animated films tend to deal with. All right, quickly, last thing.
I have to get to this.
Yes.
Speaking of animated characters, Shia LaBeouf, who everybody knows for his outrageous antics, we can currently see him lying in the corner there. He's actually taking part in a festival of his own films, watching a marathon of all the movies he's ever been in, sitting in a theater for 72 hours.
But right now he's sleeping in the back.
Unfortunately,
so
but check out that website and you can see him watching his movies the entire time, which is amazing.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
That's it from us for today. Thank you for watching. Please join us again tomorrow for another edition of Culture.